It's good to have you here, Steve. It's a real pleasure.
It's my pleasure as well. This is my first time to Warsaw, and people have been very hospitable, and my wife and I are having a great time here. Beer's wonderful.
And it's your first time to Poland, not only Warsaw, right?
Yes, first time to Poland as well.
So, what is your impression, about Poland, and maybe not about Poland, but about Polish beer? Because you've been asked, this question yesterday at the press conference, but it was yesterday. So, a lot of things changed because you probably tasted a lot more Polish craft beers. So, what do you think about them?
I think overall they're really quite good. I particularly like dark beers, and the Baltic porters and the barrel-aged beers have been fantastic. I've had some very nice IPAs. What has impressed me the most, having never been here before, is just the diversification, the number of different beer styles that I've encountered, because I did not know coming here that the craft brewing industry had made such leaps forward from what I had expected. So it's been a very pleasant surprise for me in the different styles and types of beers that I've been able to enjoy.
Have you ever heard anything about Polish beer before you came to us?
No, not really. Only the assumption in my part of the world is that Polish beer is just a more standard European lager type beers. That was what my assumption would have been, obviously incorrectly. And so there's just an amazing palette of beers up here, so it's fantastic.
Okay, as I've mentioned before in Polish, you've had the opportunity on Wednesday to choose the best beer, with Polish judges, of course, to choose the best beer of Warsaw Homebrew competition. And, can you tell us something about this? Was it a nice experience?
It was a fantastic experience. When I was invited to do that, participate in that, number one, I was very flattered that I could be included in something like that, because I knew that I would have the opportunity to meet some very wonderful individuals, get to make some new friends, you being one, and then taste some home brews, which of course is simply the precursor of everything that we have up in this room. And the beers were very interesting. It was a very diverse number of styles. It was a best of show competition, so we had 7 distinctly different beers. It was a great judging session, and it was thoroughly enjoyable, and the quality of the beers overall was very good.
Yeah, it's nice to hear. It's one of the biggest competitions, if we're talking, of course, about homebrewed beers in Poland. But you're a judge. I mean, for a couple of years, at least, you are a judge. And as far as I know, you are one of the judges at Great American Beer Festival. And this is the thing that you're still very much into. Even if you're retired, you're not longer a brewer of Sierra Nevada, you still want to judge beer, right?
Yes, I really enjoy judging in the competitions. I've judged at the Great American Beer Festival now for close to 20 years. One of the things that I've switched to doing now the last 2 years, since I'm not affiliated with a brewery anymore, is that I actually steward. So I serve the beers to the judges, which was quite interesting. But I wanted to work with the stewards backstage. It always fascinated me. Now the competition this last year at the JBF, the stewards present over 8,300 beers to the judges over 3 days, and often they're multiple because they go through medal rounds. And I was always fascinated as to how they did that, and it's truly amazing when you can get behind the scenes and see what they're doing. Plus, the benefit of stewarding is that as the beers come out of competition, you get to be back there and taste anything you want with the labels on it and know exactly what you're drinking. So if you like saisons and they're judging saison competition, at some point there might be 150 different bottles of saison on a table that you're free to taste. Of course, you sign a non-disclosure agreement, so you can't talk about it, but the stewards, they're having the blast. That's where the party's at back there, not at the judge table. It's the guys that are, the people that are bringing the beer out. But by staying, judging the competitions, doing a little bit of speaking within brewers guilds or master brewers groups, it keeps me relevant with the industry after almost 35 years. So many of my friends, my long-term friends, are in the brewing industry, and it gives me an opportunity to travel and spend time with them. The whole camaraderie of the craft brewing industry is truly amazing, and I don't want to lose that just because I quit working. I would rather not work and continue to do the fun stuff on the side that I always enjoyed.
Okay, let's go back to Sierra Nevada times. Actually, why you wanted to work in the brewery? Because it was a time when even in USA it was like maybe 90 breweries operating. So, and now it's probably 7,000. So it was not, very. I mean, you can tell.
It was not a lucrative job.
But
to be
was
honest.
it, a good perspective? Because at the time I think that most of the people thought that it will collapse, it will fail, that it's actually impossible to brew a craft beer and survive. And still, you wanted to work for them, for Sierra Nevada, which was actually very small brewery at the time. So why?
I needed a job. I had gotten out of college with degrees in biology and chemistry, and I was working for a fabrication company out at the local airport, doing really nasty anti-corrosion chemical treatments on aluminum airplane parts, which really did not mesh well with my lifestyle. And I got laid off, and I was working over the counter selling homebrew materials at the local homebrew shop, and I heard that they were looking for people to work part-time on the bottling line at this new brewery that had been opened up in town. And so I went down and applied for a position and got a job the next day putting bottles into boxes for $4 an hour under the table, which is not a lot of money. But I worked there part-time, and eventually I had the opportunity of going back to my other job that paid twice as much and had benefits. But I was having a hell of a lot of fun, and I sensed the small group of people that were involved in Sierra Nevada at the time. They were very passionate. We were very passionate about what we were doing, and there was a common goal within everybody that was there. And obviously we never thought that the brewery would grow to the size that it did over the next 20 to 30 years. But we knew that we were doing something very unique and very creative. And that was a big motivator for all of the individuals involved there, particularly the ownership and myself, as I got from packaging into the cellar and then into the brew house, and eventually 1985 or so I managed all those departments. It was just a great sense of camaraderie and a lot of fun, and we knew that we were working in an entity that had great benefit for people, and we felt there would be a moderate level of success at some point.
Speaking about those beginnings in Sierra Nevada, I've read in Ken Grossman. Ken Grossman is, of course, the owner of the brewery. I've read in his book that at first he used a canoe paddle to stir the mash. Is that right? Is that true?
That is correct. Tomorrow, sometime in the afternoon, I'm going to be showing some pictures of Sierra Nevada back in the very early days. And when I started in 1983, there were no fabricators of brewing equipment for that size. They didn't exist. And so most of the equipment that we used was used dairy vessels because they had good sanitary stainless welding and whatnot. But yes, we would mash in by hand, so we would hand lift the grist into a mash lauter tun, and then we would stir it in manually with a canoe paddle that we had sandblasted the varnish off of.
And this is craft, you know, canoe paddle to stir the mash. In a craft brewery that is now one of the biggest craft breweries in the world, probably. It's third brewery in USA now.
We also took it out with a plastic bucket and a bread pan. We took the mash out. We had a 5-gallon plastic bucket and an old beat-up bread pan, loaf pan. So we would scoop it out that way and put it in metal barrels. And then a local pig farmer and his partner, and they were both they were classic alkies. I love these guys, Ray and Jim. And they would come in their van and pick up the mash and then take it out and feed it to their hogs. They also would do a delivery where they would go to bakeries and get day-old donuts. And so they would give us day-old donuts, so we would have donuts and beer for breakfast most mornings.
Cool. Because Sierra Nevada was not the first brewery. Was not the first craft brewery in USA, but it was the first brewery to survive. There were some others that failed, unfortunately, like New Albion Brewing, for example, with Jack McAuliffe. And in your opinion, what is the recipe for success? Why Sierra Nevada did succeed and some others failed?
Well, New Albion, they were ahead of their time. They were back, 5-6 years before Sierra Nevada, 4 or 5 years before Sierra Nevada. And Jack McAuliffe was a little underfunded. And he was also, he was a very ornery man. And so trying selling your beers to accounts when you're swearing at them all the time is not the easiest thing in the world to do. But I think as far as Sierra Nevada, the thing that increased our ability for success was our total adherence to quality standards and consistency. And so when a lot of breweries were starting in the mid 80s, late 80s after Sierra Nevada, and there was a potential in the market and there was the opportunity to expand and grow. There's also the opportunity to cut corners and change things to expedite your process, increase your volume in a shorter amount of time. And if you don't adhere to very strict and consistent quality standards, the beer is not consistent and of good quality. One of the things that I'll tell people is that if you don't monitor something, you can't manage it. And so if you're not really paying attention to what's going on in your beer throughout the process, before you put it in the package, once you've put it in the package, you've extended a lot of capital into it. You really want to know what's going on in your beer prior to that and make your decision if it's not right to get rid of it. And at Sierra Nevada, that was a point of zero compromise. If when I was running the lab and I suspected that I had a microbiological issue, even though I couldn't detect it on my palate, I would dump the beer immediately because I knew that it was not going to be what we wanted to present to the consumer in the market down the road. And I have some old photos, they're not in this presentation, but of me standing in the cellar with an 1.5-inch beer hose on a 200-barrel tank with a liter mug, and I'm drinking as much of the beer as I possibly can before it swirls down the drain. Because at that point in time, it tasted perfectly fine, but I knew that within a matter of weeks, it would not be right. So it went away. I had a good time with it, but it was sad to always see it go down the drain.
There is one more question I really need to ask. It's about the thing that you're wearing here. because I know that you were awarded knighthood by the International Order of the Hop. Could you say something about this organization, about this award?
Yes, this was awarded to me the year after my retirement in 2017. I was asked to speak at the International Hop Congress in Yakima, Washington, and every 2 years they award a pin like this, and it's a knighthood. It's in the International Order of the Hop. It's a group that actually started in the 1500s, and it's hop growers around the world, which of course at that point in time did not include the United States because there was none. But because of the work that I had done within the brewing industry and also the work that I had done within the hop industry, just working with hop growers and suppliers and promoting the use of hops, developing beers like the first wet hop beer to be made. I was the first and only brewer in North America, still the only one that was given this award by this group. And right after my career, it was probably one of the greatest honors of my career because it didn't come from within the brewing industry. It came from an affiliated industry that supplies the brewers. And so for them to feel that I was personally deserving of an award outside of the hop industry was very, very rewarding to me and very flattering. Very humbling, as a matter of fact.
Okay, now, do you have any questions? Of course you have.
You mentioned dumping every now and then a batch of beer. How often does that happen? Is it like 5% or maybe 20%?
No, not even close to 5%. It's an occasional issue. You know, there was a time. Well, we moved from the original brewery that I worked at in 1983, and in 1988, 89, we moved from the very small 5-10 barrel brew house to a 100 barrel brew house with 200 barrel fermenters. And in all honesty, when we made that step up, we really didn't know how to manage certain aspects of our production, particularly in fermentation, right. And so we had some issues with bacterial contamination in our fermenters. We had some pediococcus inclusion because we weren't managing our yeast properly in the fermenters. Once we got our heads around how to do that right, we got some good advice from some friends at UC Davis, University of California at Davis, brewing college close to us that had a program there. And we were able to clean that up, for lack of a better term. But over the years, I would dump beer not because of a bacterial contamination, but maybe say you had a lot of dissolved oxygen in the process. There was a flaw in a beer transfer. And so we had instrumentation that could detect that. During fermentation, if you're moving beer and you get a shot of DO, it really drives the equation for development of diacetyl in the beer. And so I would know that I was going to have an issue downstream, and I would dump beer for that reason. I had beer where there was an operator error and there was a caustic inclusion with a CIP, a clean and process thing, and I would throw beer away for that. Often, my preference, I had very good friends that owned a distillery in the Bay Area, in San Francisco Bay Area, close to me, and they made very, very good alcoholic beverages. And so if I had a non-contaminant issue, but if I had an overproduction issue or something that I would discuss with them, I would give them the beer rather than sewer it, and then they would make alcohol out of it and then give me alcohol. So that worked a lot better. In fact, when I retired, they gave me a barrel of gin so that they had made for me. They distilled Celebration Ale and aged it in wood for a year, and then they shipped me 36 cases of gin. I have some left. So I gave an awful lot away. I gave a bottle to everybody on my staff and sent some off as gifts. But it was quite a nice thing. It's damn good gin too.
Any other questions?
During the Warsaw festivals, I get the feeling that the guys here are experimenting too much. They're not making enough of the old school stuff. How often do you guys bring out new ideas or new solutions, and how strictly do you stick to the old and tried ones?
Well, I think to a point, you can't experiment too little, because you always want to try and open up new avenues of creativity. Whether you sell those beers or not is a different thing. So at Sierra Nevada, we had a small pilot brewery. At the end there, we had a 10-barrel brew house, which we used for research and trial batches. And we also had a 1-barrel nano brewery that we could do initial testing on. And we would run those constantly. You know, the tried and true brands that Sierra Nevada had over the years, you know, traditional ales and IPAs and things of that nature, we constantly worked within those. But, you know, the non-traditional brewing ingredient inclusions, which I see a lot as I walked around here today, I've never felt that that's for me to judge if that's a good thing to put in a beer. When I've judged beers in the past, I like to get into the experimental categories or the urban spice categories, because I figure I'm going to find something unique. They're doing free R&D for me, so to speak. And as I'm sitting there at the judging table, I often think to myself, why the hell would you put that in a beer? But that's for the judgment of the brewer. And then it's the judgment of the consumer to decide, okay, that's a good ingredient in a beer, or it's an ingredient in a beer that's not to my liking. And if you don't like it, don't drink it. But you never know when you're going to come up with a flavor or an aroma or a combination that all of a sudden is just going to go crazy. So one of the things I like the most about craft brewers and the craft brewing industry, as opposed to the large industrial breweries, for lack of a better term, and I don't use that to denigrate it anyway, but there's no blinders in the craft brewing industry. There's no narrow thought or vision. Everything's up for grabs, and I think that's one of the beauties. Over the last 30 years of my career, when I started brewing, it was hard to sell a pale ale. So, seeing what people are doing now, my God, 30 years ago, imagine if you presented a sour beer to somebody with raspberries in it, and they're used to drinking their cans of domestic lager. I had a hard enough time convincing my friends to drink pale ale. They just did so because I had a shitload of it and it was free. So eventually I got them all, so it works one way or another.
Okay, you're person responsible for the first wet hopped beer, but of course you've had a lecture about this yesterday, so I'm not going to ask you about that. But I know that Sierra Nevada released also a beer with hops steam distilled right at the hop field. Yes,
we did that a few years ago, and then when I was at the Hop Growers of America booth today, and I was reading through their contacts, and there was a small company that is now marketing fresh steam distilled hops. Why Sierra Nevada didn't trademark or patent that, I don't know, but we didn't. But we were looking at ways to increase hop flavor and aroma in our beers. And we were doing a very, very heavy IPA, a hop hunter. And at the time, we were still using only 100% whole cone hops. We weren't using Sierra Nevada still does not use pellets, but they use some of the cryo powder products. So in an effort to increase hop flavor and aroma, we partnered with one of our grower friends in Yakima who also grew mint. And they had mint stills that we had seen them work out in the field, where they would distill fresh mint with steam distillation, and then they would extract the oil. And so we thought, well, why not do that with fresh picked hops? And it made for a very, very unique product. And we did this years before anybody had considered doing that as well. The hop oil was incredibly potent. And so you would use very few milliliters in, say, 200 barrels of beer, and it would really augment the hop flavor and character in the beer.
Do you think that this may be the future, this technology?
Oh, definitely. It has potential. You know, for us at the time, it was a way to circumvent some of the downstream products, mainly pellets that we had at that point in time decided not to use. Hop oils and aromatic extracts have been in existence for 30, 40 years. I used to play with them in the 80s, fractionated hop aroma oils, and I would take a toothpick and a glass of beer and spike them and see what type of aromas or flavors I could achieve. So they've been around for a very long while, but whether or not you want to incorporate those in your brewing process is up to you. But I think it does have a future.
Any questions? Come on. You got to have some questions. You know, it's Steve Dresler. It's an icon of beer revolution, so you can ask him anything.
You really can. I'm not affiliated, so I'll answer any goddamn question you ask. You might like the answer, but I don't really care.
No śmiało, śmiało. Możecie po polsku też zadać pytanie, jak się boicie po angielsku. Nikt nie ma pytań? Wszystko już wiecie? Okay, we got a question.
Hi, Steve. I know that you were judging on the beer contest right now, yesterday, I think. So how can you compare the homebrewing beers made in Poland to the USA?
Comparing Polish homebrew, I haven't judged a U.S. homebrew competition for a number of years, but I would say that when I would judge, and then I have friends that homebrew, and they often bring me beers to taste. They were very, very comparable. The one thing that I don't know about the Polish home brewing is what they have to work with. The U.S. home brewers have had quite a few years, so they have developed equipment. I don't know the raw materials, but the overall quality of the beer was really quite good. When I first started brewing, and for quite a few years after that, a lot of home brews were infected with bacteria. When I home brewed, my beers were infected with bacteria. And the beers did not have those types of flaws. So I think they're very, very comparable. I have friends that have home brewed for 10 years, more than that, and that's basically all their drink, unless they're sitting in a pub with me. And they make very, very good beer, but they've had an opportunity to develop their skill at home longer than folks here. But I have no doubt that the Polish homebrew community cannot and will not do work equal to the U.S. homebrew industry. There's no reason not. Given an equal playing field, ingredients and equipment, why wouldn't they? My favorite beer of the contest? Oh, I'm not saying.
Hey, come on. Results announcement will be at 8 p.m.
I'll say that later.
8 p.m. at the stadium field there. Results announcement of the Warsaw Homebrew competition, so be there with us. Any more questions?
Right now in Poland, all these breweries, they use bottles. I understand that Sierra Nevada mainly cans their beers, right?
Probably.
And the question is, do you see any benefit in using cans as opposed to bottles, or the other way around?
You know, to me, the benefit for cans, and yes, I think it's Sierra Nevada now, they're probably doing of their non-keg product, I think they're probably up to about 40% in cans. And it took us a long time to get into that market. I see there's no difference in the beer flavor or quality. We analyzed a lot of that. So bottle or can makes no difference. What I see as a benefit for cans, they're a little easier for recycling, and they also weigh less. And so from a freight logistic, you can ship more in a container truck than you can with glass. And so that's good economically and that's good environmentally. So those are the two benefits that I see from it. You know, the can, you know, I like to camp. I used to always bring beers with me when I would mountain bike. And so a can is a nicer package for outdoor recreation. And when I'm at home, I generally drink out of a bottle and pour it into a glass. But if I'm traveling, if I'm camping at the coast, then I prefer to have a canned beer. But I think environmentally, in some aspects, cans are a little more friendly.
You've had a question, right?
More of a comment, really. I was just going to say that you know, if anybody's not comfortable asking Steve a question in front of the crowd, to come downstairs to our booth, the Americo Kuchni booth, and visit with Steve. He's there, and he's happy to chat with anybody. So please come visit.
Very much so. I'll be around today and then again tomorrow. And even if you come up with something you would like to discuss after the fact, please feel free. I find myself to be very approachable. So, and I love to talk to people about beer. And if I have some historic knowledge that I can pass on, that's one of the reasons that I continue to do what I do, is because I really like to give back. And so because I've had the chance to experience things, I really enjoy passing that on to people. So please, feel free.
The stand is called America od Kuchni. It's on the ground floor, so you can visit Steve there. I think, you know, we're going to... Oh, we have a question there. Okay, and tomorrow, Steve will be on stage once again with the lecture about the early days of craft beer and the Sierra Nevada, so be there. Be here, actually.
I'm glad to see
And
you
we
have
have a
your
question.
priorities straight.
Hi, I've actually joined a bit late, but I don't think this question has been asked. And it's about how people approach beer in the States now with the health, issues about health. Because it seems like millennials think that everything is unhealthy. And how does that affect your beer market? Because there is a tendency maybe for people to move away from beer and even away from alcohol.
Well, I haven't experienced that in my life yet. No, the millennial market is very interesting. There is or has been a trend in the United States the last few years to go away from beer and more into, say, wine and distilled spirits. But when I say going away from beer, those are not craft beers. Those are the more generalized brands, the large brands. Craft beer is growing quite a bit in the U.S. Craft beer drinkers tend to drink less beer than, you know, what you would think of as your stereotypical beer drinker, because they're drinking more for flavor and quality than for alcohol consumption. the alcohol's higher in a craft beer for the most part, but they're mainly looking for different flavors and qualities and not just beer consumption. So as the volume of beer in the United States has declined, the volume of craft beer sales has increased. So I think that's something that I think you'll experience here over the next few years as well, because people really want to try something new and different. So and millennials, yeah, whatever.
Any questions?
I wasn't going to ask this question, but you encouraged me by saying ask anything. We spoke about cans and bottles. Now I see you're drinking from plastic. Don't you think beer from plastic tastes bad?
Not in the time that it takes me to drink it. No, that's an interesting question, and it's personal, because I live in California, and California was the first state to ban plastic straws in bars and restaurants unless you ask for them. And the world is drowning in plastic. Okay, it's a terrible thing, but it has its place. And particularly if it's either compostable, there are a lot of plastics. We used plastic cups in our sensory department, where we would go through sleeves of them, small plastic cups, but they were cornstarch based, so they were easily compostable. Bottles like this, they're great. They have a purpose. They can be recycled, but I have my stainless steel clean canteen in my backpack down at the booth that I just didn't want to carry up here. I carry it with me constantly. But as a consumer, I will say that when I go to the market or when I'm buying things, I look to see what they're packaged in. I'm an avid recycler at home, but I do pay attention to that. But yes, I'm drinking out of a plastic cup. Oh no, it's not. You can get more flavor if you have a non-properly pacified stainless mug. You'll get more off flavor from that than you will from a plastic cup. Plastic cup is basically inert. What you're going to get from here as it sits around, it's just going to tend to oxidize. But you'd have to. If I left that by the bedside and drank it in the morning, it wouldn't taste the best to me, but it probably wouldn't be from the plastic, in my opinion.
Judges at beer competitions very often use plastic cups, so it's not about the flavor.
No, it's about the waste. And so at Sierra Nevada, we had a number of beer festivals over the years, and we constantly experimented with stainless mugs that you could take home. And unless you treated them properly, the beer would take on a markedly metallic flavor in a very short amount of time, as opposed to plastic. So it's a necessary evil, but I do pay attention to my usage of it, because the amount of plastic that is wasted on the planet is a travesty.
One last question, maybe. Okay, so thank you, Steve. Thank you very much. It was
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.